Okay. Clip that there. I made investments. We got food to do. I'm cooking from this thing right here. This time around, and in theory, it's pretty simple. But what am I going to be talking about today? Well, you may remember the video that I made a while ago about dragons, right? And in that video, I talked about why there's a difference between dragons and wyverns eventually, and why the difference between dragons and wyverns are showing up in certain books. And I mentioned that one of those books I was going to talk about in the future. This is that future. Which series am I going to be talking about in that instance? Well, the series is something that you might have seen on Book Talk and things like that. And the series itself is... Yep, we're talking about this. The purpose of this episode, what I'm thinking, is that this discussion is going to be basically ferda boys. I don't know very many guys that are reading this series at all right now, and that's okay, because quite frankly, it's not really meant for the boys, you know what I mean? But anyway, the Empireon Series is a trilogy currently of books written by one Rebecca Yarros, and it is a series that has gotten quite a lot of attention online in the fantasy reading world, really. But why is that? And this is particularly a question that is, I find, most asked by the boys. The boys that are just sitting there a bit lost and wondering how this book got so much of a mass appeal. I've never used sweetened condensed milk before. So there are 3 books to the Empireon series. The first one I just shown is called Fourth Wing. The second one is a book called Iron Flame, and then there was a book that got recently released, and that book is called Onyx Storm. These 3 books make up the Empireon series, and eventually the series is going to wind up being 5 books. That's the plan. That's not bad. The question winds up becoming, is this book something that the boys can really get into? And I'm one of the few guys that have actually read each book in its entirety for whatever reason. So I feel as if I'm at least somewhat qualified to answer that question, for better or worse. So might as well give my shot at it. Oh, come on! Here we go. Woo. So the way that I thought I would describe whether or not the Empireon series is ferda boys or not is by doing a simple pros and cons tier. Well, not tier list. Is by doing a simple pros and cons list. What are the things good about it? What are the things bad about it? And then from that we'll be able to make some conclusions. Let's start with the pros, because I do like speaking positively about some things. There's some things about this series that I do think that the boys can genuinely latch on to this series. Rebecca Yarros, as an author, always said that she wanted to write fantasy. And I don't think that she's without hope here. What specifically is a positive? Is this? Oh boy. But what specifically do I mean as positives or negatives when it comes to Rebecca Yarros? Starting with the positives, she does genuinely have quite a lot of potential with her world building. I would argue that the best way to describe her world building is very tyrannical in a sense. It's not a nice world that she constructed in this book. It's very cruel, it's very mean. Most of the setting you're dealing with a very militaristic people. Spartan in a sense in their values and the way that they look at life kind of thing. And there's a lot of conflicts with neighboring peoples in regards to that. And a lot of times it doesn't wind up looking very well. So all that to say, the world building does have a surprising amount of potential. More than you would expect. I'm trying to say this all without spoilers, and to be clear, this is all just my opinion. It's totally viable that someone would completely disagree with me, and that is totally fine here, because once we get to the end of the series here, it should become obvious this is not necessarily a series for everybody. The second point is when you're reading this story, there's actually a surprising Cold War vibe going on throughout the book that is quite uncommon with a lot of fantasy. Most fantasy is pretty, cut and dry with where the loyalties are and whether or not certain people are worth fighting or not, at least from the perspective of the characters, the perspective characters. With the Empireon series, and the way that Rebecca Yarros writes at least the first book, there's quite a lot of mysteries and secrets that's being kept away from people. And with the setting that this book takes place in, which is kind of like a school war college kind of setting, then it provides quite a lot of potential, I think. There's a lot of secrets going on, there's a lot of things that the High Command are not telling everybody in the setting that the main perspective character is going through, and because of that, there winds up being quite a lot of secrets that are available to be told, and I think that's just quite interesting. Having a Cold War kind of vibe is a very difficult thing to achieve in literature, I believe, and the fact that they're able to do so here, I don't think is a small achievement with Rebecca Yarros. Quite interesting and quite allows for a lot of potential. What's the next put here? Oh yeah, we were talking about dragons earlier, so this is the book that's got them dragons hanging out, you know, good times, good fun. There's a lot of dragons in here, and the vibe that I got is that there's kind of a Top Gun kind of vibe, oddly enough. Kind of fun Top Gear vibe going on. There's a lot of, you know, alphas trying to, you know, show their place and, you know, are willing to kind of belittle each other or worse, honestly, to try and get to the very top of any one singular situation. There's a lot of rivalries, there's a lot of egos, and that winds up just being a really good hotbed for drama, and that makes things a lot of fun there. The fourth positive that I would like to point out is that Rebecca Yarros, as an author, and I wasn't really expecting this when I first read the series, but it became pretty clear that she's actually extremely good at writing combat, at writing fight scenes, which is a much rarer thing with writing in general, but particularly with fantasy writing, than one might initially believe. Not very many people that can write combat the same way that Rebecca Yarros can. I would point to possibly John Gwynne, the closest other example to the writing style, where, you know, the combat is just, it's very clear, it's very visceral, it's combat, it's violent. Something that you don't really see with writing too often. John Gwynne is able to do this, and so is Rebecca Yarros, and I wasn't expecting that, not with a book with that has the, you know, the reputation that this book has. I've never done this recipe before, and it's only like 3 ingredients, and it's, you know, butter, condensed milk, and cornstarch. I wasn't expecting this to have as prominent effect as it is. This is getting wild. It's turning into a dough. Interesting. Rebecca Yarros is actually quite adept at writing visceral, oftentimes quite ugly in a good way, fight scenes. And I think that can't be understated. Those are the main positives that I would point to when it comes to this series. But naturally, there are some negatives that need to be talked about. I think the first thing, we were talking about the world building here. The world building shows a lot of potential in the first book. Without getting too spoilery, it doesn't last very long in the next 2 books. Like the world building that just, you know, allowed for so much mystery and so much potential in the first book, it doesn't last very long into Iron Flame and Onyx Storm. And that's a bit sad to see, because it did have so much potential, and it's just not really being brought to fruition. Again, trying to avoid spoilers here, but I know some people are definitely going to argue against me on that one. Cool, but I'm just not seeing the world building being brought to where it really could be. That being said, there are only 3 books in the series, and there is still more time for that potential to really be brought forward. I just wish it was being brought forward a bit earlier. What else? Yes. What's the best way to put this? It's definitely a bit of a power fantasy kind of story. You know, with the way that things like Hollywood and isekai are going lately, that can't really be a compliment. It just feels as if the MC is just seen as, you know, so good, so powerful, and they can use their power to solve all their problems, and that's fine. There becomes a certain point where it feels undeserved, and I feel as if, especially with the second and third book, it's genuinely starting to get a bit too far into the, okay, this is just feeling undeserved kind of category. Notably, it didn't start out that way, and I don't think that this is necessarily as bad as some other media out there. It's definitely there. It absolutely is, and that can absolutely be a turnoff. And especially when you look at the contrast between the first book, where this is not as significant a problem, versus the second and third book, where this does tend to be a problem, then, I don't know, it's just a bit disappointing to see. That being said, I'm surprised how pale, well, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised how pale of a color this is, but I am surprised at how pale of a color this is. What else? Next thing, I think that the power system, the magic system in this world, is not totally well thought out. It's ripe with too many potentials for it to be abused, and yet it never seems to come to a fruition that seems satisfying. You compare this to something like Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, and Brando Sando, I mean, we all know the name if you're into fantasy. He is the king of power systems, and this feels like it's trying to have a power system like Brando Sando, but just isn't even coming close. It's such a gap. And that's a hard bridge to gap, but if you read the series, you realize how prominent the power system is in borderline every single event. People use their powers and their magic very common. It's very common, it's very often. And if it's not a logical system, or if it's not a system that makes a lot of sense, then it becomes a problem eventually. And I think this is definitely in the verge of being a problem here. The last con that I want to point to is that this is a epic fantasy, in the sense that it's large, it's got a large world, and it's got a lot of characters. But a lot of the characters, especially the secondary characters, are really just lacking something that makes them interesting or fun or unique, or just characters that are really lovable. I find a lot of the character names, at a certain point, I kind of have to read back into the book to be able to figure out who it is we're actually talking about in a specific scene, because they all start kind of sounding a bit too similar. That being said, why did it get so popular? Why did the Empireon series get so popular? Because let's be honest, if there's one series that you're going to find sporadically throughout the internet, and everybody talking about it, and everybody have an opinion on it, it is the Empireon series. And a lot of the people are absolutely massive fans for it. And why is that? Well, I think it comes down to a couple reasons. The first one is, even though the MC definitely has a bit of a power fantasy thing going on with her, it is an example of an MC taking command over her own life in a way that inspires a little bit of control. Like, if you're coming across a world and it's big and it's scary, got a lot of problems that need to be solved, the MC does act in a way that implies that, all of these problems that you face in the world are solvable and are manageable and are capable of being overcome. This is working. That is strange. And it's worth noting that the MC does this while having some serious setbacks in her own personal life. She has, it's a specific disability, I think it's nicknamed EDS. I can't tell you exactly what that stands for, but basically, it's a physical disability where it's very easy for you to break your bones and ligaments, and therefore have a lot of broken bones, have a lot of dislocations, and things like that. So the MC is really fighting through that a lot of the time. Is dropped the farther you get into the series. This is a very prominent problem in the first book, and it just doesn't wind up becoming nearly as much of a problem in later books. That is disheartening. But in the first book, this is a real grab. And it inspires, I think, a lot of hope that you can, despite what you come from and whatever your initial starting point is, that you can have a lot of potential and ultimately have a good sense of control over your life. And I think that can't be underestimated. The next point. This is romantasy, absolutely. And the scenes in it are indicative of that. There's some very sexualized writing in this going on, and I don't get it, but at the same time I can see how, if you're in a certain way, you can find a lot of, joy in reading those kind of spicy scenes. In my personal opinion, I think they're quite egregious. But that being said, I can understand the appeal that a lot of people would have in that sense. And yeah, and that kind of brings me on to my next point here, which is that Yaros has kind of filled in a interesting void left by another author, which would be Sarah J. Maas. I'm going to do another video on her in the future because I've read a lot of her books as well, and Yaros definitely fills a similar itch that Maas kind of left behind. So for a lot of people that were kind of looking for a similar itch as Maas, then this book really fills in that quite well. I'm surprised that worked. This is condensed milk, butter, and a whole bunch of cornstarch, and it made a proper dough. That is just so funny to me. Oh, is it way back there? Yes, it is. Come on! Oh, come on, you're slippery. Oh, yeah, we got it. Shows you how often I use this stuff. Okay, the final end of that recording just decided not to record, so that's less than ideal, but it does give me a chance to show you the end results of these here cookies here, which, at least that's nice. Oh, these were not supposed to be brown, but whatever. Alright, so these were not supposed to brown, but they don't look too bad, actually. But anyway, final conclusions on the Empireon series, and final conclusions on all that. Can I suggest the Empireon series Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, and Onyx Storm to the boys? I don't think so. I think the main reason for this is there's a dramatic downturn in terms of quality of the series so far. The first book, healthily into the 7 category. It's good, it's fun. That's where most of the fun questions about, like, what are all the secrets being retained, like all that kind of stuff. That's where all those really come to fruition. And with each book afterwards, that's where the world building, the character work, the power fantasy stuff, all of those problems really start coming forth, and it becomes a real problem. That being said, the best way I can look at this is if you are completely out of snacks in the kitchen, which clearly I'm just fixing here, but let's imagine that I can't bake. If you're completely out of snacks, the Empireon series is almost like a good popcorn, right? It's something that can tide you over until the next set of snacks that you do get. It's never going to be your favorite thing. I don't know anybody whose favorite snacks is popcorn, but it's enough to keep you going until the next thing that you move on to, right? That's what the Empireon series is. It's not top tier literature, it's not top tier fantasy by any means, but it does do enough to tide you over until the next one. It's quick, easy read, and that's enough. Certainly is enough for me. I'm going to keep reading it, but I wouldn't expect very many other people to be perfectly honest. There's a lot of fixes that it needs to do for it to be properly, something you remember for a while. And at this point, it just hasn't come to fruition, but I'm invested enough where I enjoy it enough. So, is the overall series good, bad? Neither really. It's like like anywhere in the 6 to maybe low 7 category of score out of 10, which isn't great, but it's enough, right? So if it's something that you're willing to try, maybe you enjoy it, maybe you don't. If you're curious, I suggest maybe borrowing the book, making your opinion based off of that, and then keep borrowing books. And if you decide it's for you or not, then great. If not, then drop it. That's about it, really. Yeah. So, thank you for watching, especially with the spontaneous Shrek going on in the background, because well, the old video recording kind of just stopped suddenly, which allows me to show you the cookies and stuff, but whatever. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for watching. Have a good one.